Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
You have an extra tab open, Jackie.
Okay. So I apologize. We're obviously having resounding hello.
Nope.
Not again.
Nope.
Can I get a little help here?
Yes. Are those the only tabs that you have open on your computer? Do you only have one tab for your
I have
email?
broadcast open.
Yeah. I'm going to try to bring you back in. Okay, Jackie? Let's just reconnect and start from scratch. Okay?
All right. Hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. Well, we apologize for that. We could say it's Hurricane Gremlins. I just wanted to say you're all entirely welcome. We're so excited to be here today. And a huge thank you to Books and Coral Gables for sponsoring today's conversation. I'm Jackie Leiden. I'm a memoirist, a journalist, and a longtime former NPR host and correspondent. And I'm also on the National Steering Committee for Writers for Democratic Action and its Wisconsin State Chair. And it's in the spirit of national togetherness that I want to welcome to you this hurricane edition of our WDA book chat. And our hearts really do go out to all who are suffering in the path of Hurricane Ian. This is our third Democracy Book Club, a monthly discussion with writers who create change. And today, of course, we'll be talking to the one and only Canadian novelist, Margaret Atwood, who's written over 50 books of fiction, poetry, and essays. She'll be in conversation with my colleague, Rachel DeWoskin, an award-winning poet, steering committee member, and the Michigan State Chair of WDA. These two writers will have a conversation as fierce and urgent as our times demand. But let me lead you up to it just a wee bit, if you will, by telling you what we at WDA have been up to. We're an all-volunteer organization. And with the backing of our 3,000 members, the steering committee has been organizing independent bookstores and libraries over the last year to participate in a nonpartisan voter registration drive that we call Book the Vote. It culminated on National Voter Registration Day last Tuesday, September the 20th. We concentrated on Texas, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And wherever we could, we partnered with the League of Women Voters. Books are democracy in action, as one of our writers have put it, and the living, page-turning demonstration of why literature is the lifeblood of a free and democratic society. So from New Hampshire to Texas, from Wisconsin to North Carolina, we held events with scores of stores, all of which you can find on our website, State Pages. We talked about democratic commitment, how poetry galvanizes citizenship, about fighting book bans, and about why voting always, always matters. And we registered people to vote. As Wisconsin State Chair, I can say how proud I was to participate with the Milwaukee Public Library, our 16 participating bookstores, and our State Poet Laureate, Dasha Kelly Hamilton. So after our chat today, I invite you to explore what these states have been doing and join us. Join WDA and offer suggestions and sign up your friends who love books and democracy. And now we are honored, deeply so, to have with us a writer who always challenges social conventions, never backs down from controversy, who's written for 6 decades and whose most famous novel, The Handmaid's Tale, followed by The Testaments, is prophetic in this crisis of abortion bans and growing authoritarianism, book bans and school board takeovers. Margaret Atwood has won, among so many honors, the Booker Prize, the Penn Lifetime Achievement Award, and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. She lives in Toronto, a good perch to observe American political foibles. And I happen to know that she's come to us quite recently from the Clifton Arts Festival in my Irish ancestral hometown, where she visited my beloved Clifton Bookshop. Her latest tome is called Burning Questions, Essays and Occasional Pieces, 2004 to 2021. And as they would say in Ireland, you're very welcome, Margaret. As I said, she'll be joined by that molten literary force, Rachel DeWoskin, whose collections have their own fiery voice, most recently 2 menus, poems, and the novel Banshee. So I turn it over to Rachel and Margaret with gratitude and hope that books are indeed the living testaments of our free society, and that dangerous books like The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments are defense against darkness. Burning questions indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for the lovely and generous introduction, Jackie, and for so much work. And Margaret Atwood, I am overjoyed to be here with you. Thank you for coming to talk with us at WDA and for being such an unequivocal force of complexity and good in the world in terms of progress and justice, in addition to stunningly great literature and radical TV. I'm hoping that we can start by talking about human imagination, if that sounds okay to you. Early in Burning Questions, you quote Blake's notion that human imagination drives the world. And you add, at first it only drove the human world, but now we're next door to being in control of everything except the weather. But it's still the human imagination in all its diversity that directs what we do. It's a necessity to understand the imagination. So I'm curious how we go about understanding imagination and what is its relationship to progress.
Well, I think understanding the imagination is key to understanding what sort of beings we are. And we are not, you may have noticed this, we're not unmixedly benevolent, well-behaved, nice people. I was talking with a novelist recently, actually a novelist in Ireland, Eileen Feeney, I bet you know her. And she said that people were complaining because the people in her book weren't nice. I said, well, so they were real. She said, thank you. So what you want to read about in a novel is not necessarily who you would like your roommate to be. You know, those are two different things. But unless we can understand how bad we can be, we are also not going to be able to understand how good we can be. And we think we know that reading in-depth literary works about other people is probably the closest we can get to understanding what it's like to be another person, and that increases our empathy. But you may also have been wanting to talk about the free market of ideas, and the moves that have been being made in your very own country, home of liberty and democracy, to shut down that free market of ideas.
Yeah, it reminds me actually of Virginia Woolf's idea that reading can allow for elimination of the ego and perpetual union with another mind. I wonder also, though, about the natural world. I think you make the apt if worrisome point in the essays that if the natural world ceases to exist, all of our imagining and all of our conversation and work will have no stage on which to matter.
Yeah.
I would love to hear you talk about the natural world, from the tree infestations and caterpillars in the soups of your childhood to your work for climate change champion causes, and also about Rachel Carson, who is woven through and brought to life by your book in such beautiful and thoughtful ways. Okay,
so it happens to be true that it's not a question of people being over here and nature being over there. That's not how things really are. Every time you breathe in, you are breathing in nature. And every time you breathe in, you're breathing in oxygen, which was made by early plant life 1.9 billion years ago. So if we kill the oceans, that's kind of it for us, because those oceans are still producing 60 to 80% of the oxygen that we breathe through the marine algae that live in them. The rest of it is produced by land-based plant forms. And before there were any plants, the atmosphere was methane, not oxygen. So we are not separate from nature. We are a part of nature. And if you destroy the biosphere, that's really it for us. Maybe a couple of rich people get on rockets and go to Mars. And how long will that last, Rachel? What do you think their chances are? Yes, I think that you go off to an island, build yourself a fortress, but you're still going to have the problem of breathing if you're a human being. So Rachel Carson was a pioneer, and as you know, she took on DDT. She figured out herself. She started out as a marine biologist. She figured out that there was a link between DDT and the declines in particularly raptor populations. And she figured out that the accumulation of DDT in the food chain was causing the birds' eggs to be very thin, so that when they tried to hatch them, they actually were breaking them just by sitting on them. And she was met with huge amount of opposition, particularly from chemical companies who had been telling everybody, of course, that this was a miracle chemical. You've heard that more recently about Roundup, that was completely safe. Untrue, and untrue about Roundup as well. So the chemical companies really threw everything at her, including the idea that because she wasn't married, she must be a communist. I don't know where they got that. Seems kind of bonkers. But comforting thought. Ours is not the only age that is filled with disinformation and false so-called facts. So she withstood it. She held her ground, and that's why I made her a saint in the Mad Adam trilogy. She's Saint Rachel Carson. Don't you think that fits?
I do, and I think it's beautifully rendered again in the essays. It reminds me of your essay on scientific romance, which is quite funny. And in it, you delineate between science as belonging to the realm of knowledge and fiction, which takes its domain in the realm of feeling. I'm curious to hear you articulate the relationship between science and fiction, both when science is the adjective and fiction is the noun, and just when they're both nouns.
Okay, so science is disprovable. It deals in facts, and it can be tested. And people often get very frustrated with it for that reason, because you're told, a couple of years ago, we think this, and then tests are done and further experiments are made, and no, actually we were wrong. Really, it's this. And because I grew up with the scientists, I've always understood that. And scientists are quite skeptical of anything purporting to be science and having the label of science. Is it really? What was the experiment you did? How did you do it? And is it replicable? Can we repeat it? Will we get the same result? My dad used to tell a joke about a scientist who wanted to find out what made people drunk. Well, he fed them rye and ginger ale. He fed them rum and ginger ale. He fed them bourbon and ginger ale. And he concluded that it must be the ginger ale because it was the factor. So you have to also know what you're looking for with science and how you are trying to find that and prove that. With fiction, you're dealing with an imagined world. It's always based on some form of reality, otherwise we wouldn't be able to understand it at all. And in fiction, there are characters, even if they are rabbits or hobbits, they're always actually people. And one reason why it is so difficult to raise money for conservation is that you're raising it for something that isn't people. We identify most closely with things that either are people or look like people, and especially babies, which is why there are so many fans of baby seals, kittens, owls, anything that's got two eyes looking at you, big eyes, sort of like babies. Snakes, not so much a fan club. You might have noticed that.
We like to conserve and protect cuteness. Turns out.
Well, what we think is cute are things that look like baby us. That's what we think is cute. There's no way around that. If we didn't think babies were cute, they would be hurled out of the window quite frequently.
I was going to say it's probably profitable for our survival.
Well, it's essential for our survival. Something that does nothing but cry and poop. If it weren't cute,
Right.
it would get rid of it pretty quickly.
I'm going to tell my kids as soon as I get home.
Yeah, tell them. Good thing you're
This revelation.
Yes. So fiction is always about people, and it's really imperative for us to understand other people, because we need to be able to anticipate what they might be going to do next. I think this is a very, very old program that we have, because when you were living with a small group of other people long ago, you had to be able to figure out what they might be likely to do. What were the signs?
Yeah.
What is an angry person? What is a happy person? What is a person who might have some wisdom to impart to you? So I think storytelling, language, it's one of our oldest technologies. And storytelling has to do with the fact that we figured out that there was a past, a present, and a future. And that's what stories are. They are events unfolding in time. And that is a very, very powerful thing to have at your disposal. And it's also very powerful to be able to put theoretical cases, what ifs.
Yeah.
What if we did it this way? What if we did it that way? So most animals can't do that, although some of them are quite good problem solvers. But they don't have a communicable rendition of the future. Like they don't have a what if about the future. And human beings do. And that allows them to have big plans. Their big plans don't always work out. You may have noticed that as well. But it allows them to make big plans.
Right.
So what are their big plans always about? Their big plans are always about stuff that human beings want. And what do they want? Our guide is quite often folk tales. So folk tales through the ages and the desirable things that are in the folk tales. And they get around the world quite a lot. So the cloak of invisibility, big motif. And the table that conjures up delicious food for you and then cleans up itself. Like you don't have to cook it. You don't have to do the cleaning up. So all of these things in folktales, the 7 league boots allows you to travel very quickly. The weapon that will never fail, that's been on everybody's list for quite a long time. The beautiful princess or prince who is loyal to you, whereas you yourself have a wide choice of other partners. It's also a motif in fairy tales. So we go about inventing these things because those are the kinds of things that we want as human beings. You can find them in stories, what we want, what we fear. That's the other thing. How do we combat the things that we fear? And we go about the 7 league boots. We invent airplanes. The table that sets itself and cleans itself up. Takeout with delivery service.
Right.
You just fill them up.
And it takes us back to imagination, right? Because in order to make something, you first have to imagine it.
Imagine them, and we imagine them because we want them or fear them.
Right.
So,
I think it's also about asking. It seems to me that the way that you frame both science and fiction, the engines for science and fiction as pursuits tend to be wonder. So, I mean, I've always resisted the idea that we should write what we know. I think that's not that interesting. And I think there's no good way to do it necessarily, unless one is a propagandist or sloganeering in a certain sense. I thought it was very profound that you framed this wise collection as a series of questions. Of course, you have your hilarious thing about our common Polonius impulse to deliver advice even when people don't desire to hear it from us. It's a very wise book, and I wonder how you knew to make it burning questions, and what that means for you to ask rather than to describe or advise or even convey.
Well, of course, everybody does a certain amount of describing and advising anyway.
Right.
The Polonius essay is really about older people in relation to younger people, and it just happens to be true that unless they want to know something from you, they are not going to hear all this advice that you dole out to them. And you can test that out yourself in real life, but we were that way. Of course we were. Don't hear it. Okay. What was the question? Why did you
I admired your defense of Polonius as a very good consultant. I thought that was wise and also hilarious. But the question's really about the calling the book Burning Questions and thinking of this lifetime of work and the way that it accrues knowledge and depth and profundity as a large question or a set of questions.
Yeah. So it's a collection of essays written between 2004 and basically last year, and it's third in the series. I've got two other ones that are collections of earlier things. And what I noticed that in my first one, I was doing a lot of book reviews and no obituaries. And in this one, I'm doing far fewer book reviews, but more obituaries. What does that tell us? It tells us that I got older. And I wish that for all of you, because what's the alternative? So burning questions. We are at a moment in history. We are at a moment right now when there are issues that we must solve. So it's no longer about I hate my neck. It's about I hate my neck too. You can do that too. But in addition to that, you have to do, are we really going to destroy the human species? Yeah. Knowing everything we know and knowing that there are steps that we can take, are we going to take those steps? And that is really a burning question. Yeah. As we've seen, there's been a lot of burning going on. And the other burning question, I would say, for right now is what you're doing in this group, which is Writers for Democracy. Democracy, which people took for granted in North America for quite a long time, is under serious threat here and now. And let me just remind you that Hitler got elected. That was a democratic system. But if you elected a dictator, it doesn't take them too long to roll up the democratic institutions, eliminate them, and replace them with a totalitarian system. And if you read the history of the Russian Revolution, you can see the same thing happening there. The American Revolution escaped that. They were early on the ground for revolutions. And they escaped that for a lot of reasons. One of them was that there were a lot of outs. You could get out of the space a lot more easily than you can in some of these other countries. But the other one was that they sorry, I've got COVID.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. They gave a lot of thought to it. They wanted to put in checks and balances. Yeah. They knew the dangers of power plays and people taking over because they had been seeing them acted out through monarchies and religious wars over the past couple of centuries. And they wanted to avoid that. So they put a lot of thought into it.
What about hope? I was delighted by your reading of the end of 1984, Orwell's optimism, and the relationship between the tense in the essay on Newspeak and hope. And I also liked your observation that French, in her book From Eve to Dawn, being a peculiarly American kind of activist, insists on hope. So I wonder, do you think there's still an American kind of activist committed to hope? And is hope useful, or is it like a risky, luxurious, Pollyanna-ish denial to remain too hopeful? Do you feel hopeful?
Well, there's various kinds of hope, and one of the kinds is, hey, it's just all going to work out, and you don't have to do anything about that. The other kind is, there's hope for us if we act. So the alternate to hope would be despair, which I find quite useless, not helpful. Looking at the Black Death as one does from time to time, people reacted to that in several ways. One of them was, the end of the world has come, therefore let's just party.
Yeah.
Which is actually the default position for despair. So hope is useful in that if you don't have any hope, you take no steps. You take no positive steps. It's counterindicated if it's just an excuse for doing nothing because somebody else is going to take care of it for you. As for your question about America, I am not counting out America, and neither are you, or you wouldn't be doing this.
That's true.
Yeah.
And thank you for saying it that way.
And I've seen a huge amount of response to attempts to shut down things, to shut down democratic institutions, to shut down democratic norms, to enshrine inequality, to shut down women. I've seen a lot of response to that. And if you want some inspiration, you'd better look at what the young women in Iran are doing right now, which is really quite astonishing. So I don't think things have reached that stage quite in the United States yet, but not for want of wishing on the part of some extremely right-wing people there.
The women in Iran are definitely radically courageous. And I want to talk about Handmaid's Tale, of course, and feminism. And you write in the essay about the responses to the Handmaid's Tale, the not so bothered in the UK about the prospect of this scenario happening there, Canada asking nervously, could this happen here? And the US somehow, even in 1985, knowing to ask, how long have we got? And I wonder, are we bending toward feminist progress? Is it nonlinear, or are we moving, as some of us sometimes feel we are, just straight backwards?
Nothing is ever linear, really.
Right.
So there is no inevitable road to the Emerald City of Oz. History doesn't move in one in the direction you favor in some kind of inevitable fashion. And that's why when people say wrong side of history, it's actually a meaningless statement, because history does not have sides in that way. I think the linear arrangement of time is very influenced by the Bible, actually. So you begin with Genesis and you end with the New Jerusalem, and it's inevitable. This is just what's going to happen. But it wouldn't have been that way unless people had developed the Codex book as a form. Because before that time, the books of the Bible were scrolls. And people sat down and they arranged them in that linear fashion. And books are like that. You have a first page, you have a last page. It gives you the idea that time is like that too, and that you just keep turning the pages and you get to this inevitable last page. But things aren't like that. In actual fact, there are various other ways of arranging time. So I wouldn't get too discouraged about retrograde motions.
Yeah.
There have always been pushbacks when there have been pushes. But similarly, there have always been pushes when there have been pushbacks. So if you think of it as a pendulum, where's the good place to be? The good place to be is usually in the middle, and that's where it's calmest.
Yeah.
At the edges, things can get pretty squirrely. So I think maybe the question to ask is, how close to one of these edges are we getting?
Yeah.
Or let me draw you a little circular diagram. It's a circle. Up at the top is totalitarianism. Down at the bottom is chaos. Through the middle is where we would like to be. Things are calmer there. We could call it liberal democracy. You have an arrow going up towards totalitarianism, both on the right and on the left. You have one going down towards chaos, both on the right and on the left. And then you've got a great big arrow on either side, right and left, going all the way up to totalitarianism, because you skip liberal democracy completely. So I find that a useful way of looking at things. And there is no guarantee that somebody who comes in with the best of intentions won't then get power grabbed by somebody like Joe Stalin.
Yeah. So if we're on the subject of action or making ourselves useful or trying to center our, I think it's very interesting to imagine that visual description as writers without sloganeering, right? Without veering into sort of propagandistic territory.
It's not saying who's right or who's wrong. It's just saying that this is what you have to be aware of. It can go pear-shaped on either side.
Right.
And
you write
as writers, of course, what you most want is a situation in which you're able to publish your book.
Right.
Yeah, without too much censorship going on meanwhile, without it getting burnt in a big pile in somebody's town square.
Right, which feels like a close future and is a present tense in many places. I mean, I'm always aware, having spent much of my life outside of the US, that there are many places in which we couldn't be having this conversation.
Not at all. Not at all. Where were you, Rachel?
I spent most of my 20s in Beijing. And a lot of my friends are artists there. And it's just a very different context.
Extremely.
Yeah.
Extremely different.
Okay, you say, let's hope if democracy implodes and free speech is suppressed, someone will record the process as it unfolds. And also earlier in the essays asked, does burn it all down, a popular slogan in our times, mean all, really? For instance, does it all mean all words? What about the creatives, as some are in the habit of calling them? What about writers and writing? Are we to be mere mouthpieces, reeling out acceptable platitudes that are supposed to be good for society? Or do we have some other function? I mean, I think it's a little bit shifty or something to ask you your questions back. I realize the way to find the answers to these questions, you should all know, is to read Burning Questions. But it'd be fun to hear you articulate our function and talk about the overlaps between being a writer and being a decent citizen of the world and being somebody active enough to make hope worthwhile.
Yeah, well, these debates have been going on at least since Plato, who thought that poets should be exiled because they told lies about the gods and therefore were immoral. And, you've seen Oliver Cromwell comes in, he shuts down the theater because it's immoral. Flaubert writes Madame Bovary, he ends up in court because it's immoral. So this has been going on for a long time. And there's always going to be a swinging back and forth. Should you be able to publish absolutely anything you want? Should you be able to say absolutely anything you want without repercussions? I think there have always been limits to that. And in our society, it tends to be libel, slander, defamation, that kind of thing. So there's always going to be a negotiation between artists and the society that is infested with them. but the idea of the artist as a rebel and that kind of thing, that's 19th century. Before that time, they were essentially paid court jesters, patronized by dukes, employed by popes. There were limits, and there were always limits. That's why you don't find a lot of religious swearing. In fact, you don't find any religious swearing in Shakespeare, because there was a censor.
Mhm.
So we're always aware, to a greater or lesser extent, of context. But if you try to write an absolutely blameless book, Rachel, how interesting is it going to be?
I mean, it's impossible anyway. I've never met a blameless writer.
I've
It
never,
reminds me of Baldwin too. You know, Baldwin has that beautiful moment in the creative process where he talks about how if you're going to live in society, or if you are a society, you have to assume that some things are stable. But in fact, for artists, the obligation is to assume that nothing at all is stable, and basically to rock the boat, to hold up a mirror to all the potential horrors and the possible terrifying futures and the flaws in society, and actually stop averting our eyes from those things. So it's uncomfortable. And it makes our characters unlikable, unrelatable.
Unlikable. Yeah, some of them are, and if they were all likable, again, what would they be doing all day? They would be doing likable things. So, can I get you another cupcake, Rachel?
I would read that.
Maybe you'd like to get me another cupcake. We can get each other cupcakes and talk about the weather. So Mrs. Beaton's book of household management, full version, not just the cooking part. She's got advice on everything, including what kinds of conversations you should have when making your obligatory social visits to other people. What do you think, Rachel? Avoid religion, avoid politics. Officers' messes in the army, you avoided religion, politics, and women, because those always led to fights. So Mrs. Beaton recommends the weather and an inquiry after the health of the person that you're talking to and their family. Those are always safe.
Right.
Have you
No,
noticed
thank you.
that it, oh, come on, Rachel, aren't you nice? You want to be a nice person, don't you? Sure you do.
I'm very cordial in person, but not in my writing. Yeah.
There you are. Have you noticed
Yeah.
that in emails now it's become the fashion to say, hope you're well at the
I have
beginning,
seen that.
and then at the end you have to say, keep safe?
Yeah. Yeah. That's creepy. Actually, now that you say it,
It's a social,
safe is a creepy sign off.
it's a social convention that we are now engaged in. It used to be things like yours sincerely, but nobody says yours sincerely anymore, do they?
I have a tendency to sign my emails love or XO, even when they're meant to be somewhat professional. It seems more humane to me than stay safe.
Did you do that to your banker, Rachel?
I never email my banker. Okay. So there are a couple of beliefs that you posit when you're talking about the origin and life of The Handmaid's Tale. And I just wonder if there's a way to wield these in service to our goals, which are to safeguard human life and the natural environment and the freedom to read and write. And the rules are that if true believers say they'll do a thing, when they get the chance, they'll do it. Whoever says it can't happen here is wrong. Anything can happen anywhere, given the right conditions, as history has demonstrated time and time again. And to those two, you add power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I wonder if there's not some way to turn those in service of the activism that we're talking about.
Well, turn them in what way?
I know, that's the question. I need advice. I need a little Polonius here.
Okay. Your goal is?
To safeguard the environment, to safeguard democracy, to fight radically against injustice of all sorts, in America in particular, racial injustice, injustice against women worldwide, and to use what we have, which is myth, right? We have the stories, we have voices, we have a ton of resources in terms of human energy and imagination. And I'm trying to figure out how to harness it and how to combine it with the good sort of hope toward social justice and towards safeguarding freedom for all human beings.
That's a very big ask, Rachel.
I know.
Let's break it down into parts. So dealing with the climate crisis, I can refer you to a website called Project Drawdown. And that gives you all of the things that we are currently doing, plus the money and the statistics and the numbers. If we did them more, would lead to a drawdown of carbon out of the atmosphere in, e.g., 20 years. So these are practical steps. We're doing a program right now called Practical Utopias on a website called Disco. And we are getting teams of people together from all around the world to construct thought experiments using materials that are already available, no magic wands, stuff we already have at our disposal to build better. So greener, carbon neutral, carbon negative, scalable, cheap enough so people can afford it, and attractive enough so they'll actually do it. And that would be food, clothing, housing, energy, waste disposal, stuff like that. All of the things that every human society has always had to deal with. So that's in that area of your question. We also have a couple of segments on governance, which is essentially who says who does what. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to do if people disagree with you? How do you spread the wealth? The society in the US ever since Reagan has been shoving wealth upwards to the 10 and 1%. And the trickle-down effect actually doesn't work. And so it's disprovable. So like that. So what do we mean when we say democracy? What do we mean when we say equality? These are questions that our groups will have to answer themselves when they're building their thought experiments. And how do we make decisions? And that's a really important one right now. I think it also, one of the things that's interesting to me is in studying moments of social disruption, such as the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, and the fall of Robespierre. There's an excellent book called The Fall of Robespierre. These things are quite often not anticipated.
Yeah.
And something kicks it off, like this protests in Iran right now. An incident kicked it off. But unless there was a large amount of smoldering going on, nothing would have happened. So an inciting incident meets a bunch of smoldering that's going on. So I think probably one of the things that we think writers should be doing is looking at what is and saying, is this really working? And for whom is it working? Who's it working for?
Yeah. One of the things we're asking folks to do at Writers for Democratic Action is to write a sentence about democracy. It actually turns out to be a very difficult and important prompt. Well, you can have 20 words, up to 20 words, and just make a sentence about democracy. It can be a question. You can cheat if you want, use a semicolon or colon. But say what you think it is, and let's lay out some of the definitions and the ideas and the questions and the wishes, using human imagination to push our own hope forward, I think.
Yeah,
Can we talk for a minute about freedom too? Freedom and its opposites?
Yeah, freedom to and freedom from. As to democracy, one of the ways of coming at it is to say what it isn't. So it's not an absolute monarchy.
Right.
It's not a totalitarianism. It's not an oligarchy where only rich people get to say. And you can often find things that have a facade of democracy, but that's not really who's making the decisions. So in a democracy, it ought to be the citizenry itself by the people, for the people. It ought to be that, but behind this, there's often quite a few power brokers and, in your case, big donors to political parties who are calling the shots.
My case as the representative of America.
Yes.
When I was a kid in China, people used to say to me all the time, "You're America," and I would be like, "Is it mine?" I was a representative or something, but I didn't want to take all ownership of the thing,
What was the next?
I'm curious about readers too, like the way that you are talking to people in your work. You're in your essay about the future library, you say, but all writing is a method of preserving and transmitting the human voice. The marks of writing made by ink, printer, brush, stylus, chisel lie inert like the marks on a musical score until a reader arrives to bring the voice back to life. Can you talk about that resuscitation and the conversation or the connection between your writing and your readers, both when you're making your work and when it lives in the world?
Well, the reader is to the book as the violinist is to the musical score. So unless somebody is reading a book, it's essentially inert. It's just kind of there. It's there in the physical world, but it's not in anybody's head. So let's talk about the rediscovery of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Where were you for the last 3,000 years? Well, I was sort of lying in a heap and a bunch of clay tablets under a mound of dirt. Somebody rediscovers, somebody translates, and there you are reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, which, while you're reading it, is very immediate. You are there. So reading a book is like time travel. It is like, what else is it like? It's like finding yourself in another body, depending on how good the writer is, of course. And it is teleportation. So, but that is happening in the head of the reader. They have done some studies which indicate that reading a narrative is the closest, as far as neurological activity goes, to the actual event. So closer than television, closer than movies, closer than radio, because you, the reader, are filling it all in. So I say a tree is in a field. Then you are imagining kind of tree and what kind of field.
Yeah.
That's why it was such a shock to see Mr. Darcy coming out of that lake in the movie. Well, that's not what I thought Mr. Darcy looked like. He certainly never came out of a lake. So the movie fills a lot of things in for you. It's one thing it has not been able to do, film and television and radio cannot do. They can't do taste and smell.
Right.
Whereas books can do those extremely well and often have. So you, the reader, you're the producer, the director, the enactor. You are everything to do with the recreation of what is being brought to life when you are reading this book.
That's a lovely answer. It makes me think too of the moment when you quote Dylan Thomas talking about "in my craft" or "sullen art." And I found that such an interesting distinction that he makes. I also loved your poem. I thought it was like a little treasure hidden in the collection to come to that poem. And this is my last question, because I'm going to pull some questions from our readers who are, of course, bringing this conversation to life the way readers bring writing to life. Are you writing poems?
I write poems from time to time. I put them in that drawer right over there.
Got it. And then you take them out eventually and we resuscitate them by reading them?
Yes, my problem is that I write them in handwriting, and sometimes by the time I take them out, I have quite bad handwriting. I can't actually read exactly what I have written. But then I get to do some more invention, don't I, Rachel? Let's pretend that let's pretend that says this.
Fair enough. It seems fair. You're the creator. I'm going to end before I turn to audience questions just by saying I was struck by the prompt from the gathering that you attended in the far north. This is beautifully described in the essays, and there was a question when the collective students were making garments from skins or making pieces of writing, and the question was, who is it for? And the assignment that came out of that question was asking the women in this gathering to write messages to the women who were not gathered there. And I just wanted to read a couple of the messages that they wrote out to the world to ask everybody in this room and beyond, not just to write a democracy sentence, but also to write one of these messages as assigned by Margaret to her students. One of them was, I am a woman. I am proud of being me. You can be proud of who you are and proud of yourself. Another was a message to the ladies in the world. Remember that you are loved very much and you are not alone. I thought that was really very profound and moving. One of the questions in the question box from an audience member is a question about our friend and fellow writer Salman Rushdie and the brutal and unforgivable attack on him. David Hawkins is asking if you have any thoughts on that, any word on his condition, anything you'd like to say about Rushdie.
Okay, we just did an event for him in Toronto in which we all read from his books. And he is, as far as I can make out, he's doing better. But when you've been stabbed that number of times, of course, it's not an immediate recovery. I'm about to read the galleys of a forthcoming book that he will be bringing out called Victory City. So there is another Rushdie book that will shortly appear. And I think it's just miraculous that he's alive. I also have to say, Chautauqua, what an unlikely place.
Yeah.
Just unlikely. Full of these nice people. So it's just you're not expecting it. And that's what I mean when I say there is no, it can't happen here.
Yeah. That leads cleanly into another question from Christy Lohman in the question box. She says, I read that you do not write about anything humans have not already shown they're capable of. Do you think we've become politically complacent enough to allow a Gilead type of society to come to fruition?
Not anymore. I think in the late 80s, I would have said yes. But since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, I think that has been a wake-up call to a lot of people. And I don't think it's even the question of, I don't think it's just limited to women's health care. It's the question of who owns your body. And that goes for men as well as women, because once you have the precedent is the state owns your body, then what else is going to happen? There is a male equivalent, and that would be called conscription. And you're seeing that happen in Russia right now.
Right.
But in any kind of a decent society, if you conscript somebody, you're responsible for their clothing, their food, their lodging, and their medical care. Are you not? So if you really want to conscript women's bodies, you should pay for all of those things. It's only fair.
Very good point.
Yeah, let's see people voting on that, folks.
Yeah.
Number 2, First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says freedom of religion and no state religion. And they put that in the Constitution because they had seen the results of these religious wars over centuries in Europe. They wished to avoid it. So freedom of religion and no state religion, that means you can believe what you like, but you cannot impose your religious beliefs on other people. And this idea that a clump of cells gets a soul as soon as it becomes more than two cells, that's a religious belief. It's not a fact. We have to distinguish between beliefs over here, no evidence required, facts over here, they can be disproven, and opinions in the middle, which are based either on beliefs or on facts. So what is it to impose these kinds of laws on people based on nothing but a religious belief? It is the imposition of your religion onto other people, which is against the United States Constitution, as far as I am concerned.
There's a follow-up question to that from Cheryl, which is, how do you feel about the extreme views and values of conservative Christians being pushed forward as the definition of Christianity, to the point that they're using it to take over democracy? Is there hope that Christianity will return to a less extreme norm?
Okay, Christianity has always been multiple, and in its origins, it is what you would now probably say call radical left. So poor people more virtuous than rich people. Is that communist or what? What does Jesus have to say about women being inferior? Nothing. What does Jesus have to say about birth control? Nothing. What does Jesus have to say about homosexuality? Nothing. What does he have to say about loving your fellow human beings? A lot. So that kind of Christianity fueled such things as, for instance, the abolitionist movement, getting rid of slavery, and a lot of other social justice movements. And that kind of Christianity is still with us today. It's just that it got overshadowed by these other people who attracted a lot more money. It's always popular, or you can always raise more money out of fear than out of let's all get alongishness, or everybody should love everybody else. That's hard to raise money on, Rachel, but these people are coming to get you. Well, alarm bells go off, and you can raise money off that. And also, if you say, these people are coming to get you, and by the way, you can get a lot more power if you do things our way.
Yeah.
So Christianity got power grabbed, partly because people in the middle, like moderates, abandoned it.
Yeah. One more question. This one from Ken DeWoskin, who is my dad.
Yeah,
You mentioned Mr. Darcy coming from the lake.
Yes.
Did you experience something like this when you became involved in the television rendering of The Handmaid's Tale? For example, things different from the way you yourself originally envisioned them?
Without a doubt. I think that always happens when something gets embodied in a different art form. And we're about to see a ballet of the Mad Adam trilogy. I can hardly wait. What will that be like? I do not know. So we've had things. There's a Handmaid's Tale opera, again. There's a graphic novel. So each of these embodiments is a different rendering or version, and of course it's going to be different from what you may originally have had in mind. But unless things go from one embodiment to another, and from one way of reading it to another, they become inert. They lose dynamic. So I don't see it as a bad thing. I'm going to throw a couple of religious Christian groups in here for you, for the person who asked the question, in case you're unaware of them. One of them is a green religious group called Arocha, Arocha. And another one is one called Sojourners, which is based in Washington, D.C. And it has been going since the 60s. So if you despair that Christianity has been completely taken over by these other things. That's not true either. They make a lot of noise, and they probably need to be challenged theologically, because a lot of the things that they say about Christianity are certainly not true of its origins.
That was a dazzling conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. Please write a democracy sentence, drop it in the chat, email it to us, post it, tweet it, respond to Margaret Atwood's beautiful prompt about sending a note to somebody who's not gathered with us today. And please come to our October Democracy Book Club featuring Dahlia Lithwick in conversation with our own brilliant Siri Hutzfet about Lady Justice, women, law, and the battle to save America. Finally, let's put our animatronic hands together one more time for the utterly inimitable Margaret Atwood. Thank you endlessly for joining us today.
Such a pleasure, Rachel, and thank you. And thank you to everybody. And it ain't over.